From the archives of the Blackwood estate, in a leather-bound diary penned in a delicate fading hand, a story of quiet resilience was recovered. It began not with a thunderclap of fate, but with the slow, creeping damp of despair that had settled into the very stones of Oakhaven Manor, the house that was no longer a home. Elara Pembroke existed within its walls as a ghost, a silent witness to the slow dismantling of her own life. Since the fever had claimed her parents 2 winters prior, she had become a ward of her cousin, Viscount Finch, a man whose ambition was a threadbare coat he wore with the swagger of a king's ermine. Oakhaven, once a place of light and laughter, now felt like a gilded cage whose bars grew tighter with each passing day. The Viscount and his sister Beatrice moved through its halls with the proprietary air of conquerors, their voices a constant, grating reminder of Elara's diminished state. They sold her mother's pearls to finance a trip to London and her father's library to settle a gambling debt, all while lamenting the terrible burden of her keep. Elara, with her quiet disposition and her plain, mended gowns, was an inconvenient relic of a past they were eager to erase. Her intelligence was an irritation, her kindness a weakness to be exploited. She was furniture that breathed, a silent portrait that occasionally required feeding. Her only solace was found in the stables, a place redolent with the honest scent of hay, leather, and horse. Here the memory of her father was strongest. He had been a master of horsemanship, a man who believed a horse's trust was a thing to be earned, not broken. He had taught Elara not just to ride, but to listen, to the flick of an ear, the tightening of a muscle, the soft nicker that spoke volumes. Now she was forbidden from riding. Beatrice had declared it unseemly for a woman in her delicate position. The truth was simpler. They feared the flicker of freedom it might ignite in her eyes. So she cared for them in secret, whispering stories to the great gentle beasts in the half-light of dawn, her hands grooming their coats until they shone like polished mahogany. Viscount Finch was a man hollowed out by his own inadequacies. He possessed a minor title and a major appetite for the vices of his betters. His cruelty was not the sharp, deliberate strike of a serpent, but the persistent, gnawing irritation of a rat. He saw Elara not as family, but as a dusty asset whose value he had yet to calculate. Her small protected inheritance, left by a shrewd grandmother, was just beyond his legal reach, a fact that chafed him raw. His plan, therefore, was to marry her off to some decrepit crony who would pay handsomely for a biddable young wife with a guaranteed annuity, a sum Finch intended to split. The impending county horse fair was a source of both dread and anticipation for the local gentry. It was a grand affair of commerce and social manoeuvring, culminating in a series of races that drew spectators from 3 counties. For Finch, it was an opportunity he planned to sell Willow, the last of her father's prize mares, a spirited creature with a coat the colour of spun moonlight and a heart as brave as a lion's. For Elara, the thought was a physical pain, a final, brutal severing of her last link to the man who had adored her. The fair also brought with it a more formidable presence, Duke Alistair Vance of Blackwood Manor. The Duke was a legend, a phantom who rarely left the vast brooding expanse of his estate. Whispers followed him like his own shadow, a man of immense wealth and power, frozen in a perpetual winter of grief since the tragic death of his wife and child a decade ago. He was known as the Iron Duke, a man whose heart was said to be as cold and unforgiving as the granite tors on his lands. His attendance was rare, and it meant he was seeking prime stock for his famous stables, a fact that made Finch's eyes gleam with avarice. The day of the fair dawned with a sky the colour of a bruised plum. The air was thick with the smell of trampled grass, roasting meat, and nervous horses. Elara stood beside her cousin, a silent figure in dove-grey wool, feeling utterly invisible amidst the cacophony of brightly dressed ladies and boisterous gentlemen. Finch was in his element, preening and posturing. As he led Willow into the packed auction ring, the mare, sensitive to the tense atmosphere and the rough hands of the groom, danced nervously, her eyes wide with alarm. Ilara's heart ached to see her so distressed. A wealthy squire, red-faced and reeking of brandy, was inspecting the mare with a proprietary leer, running a heavy hand along her trembling flank. Finch was extolling her virtues with the oily charm of a snake-oil salesman. Ilara could bear it no longer. She stepped forward, her voice low but clear, cutting through her cousin's patter. She needs a gentle hand, cousin. She is spirited, not vicious. Beatrice, who had been observing from the side with a look of bored disdain, let out a tinkling, malicious laugh. Oh, do be quiet, Ilara. What would you know of such things? You are merely sentimental. Finch shot her a look of pure venom. He lowered his voice. A hiss meant only for her. You will not embarrass me. This animal will fetch a fine price, and you will hold your tongue. He turned back to the squire, his smile pasted back on. My cousin has a woman's soft heart, you understand. She is far too frail to handle such an animal anyway. Better it goes to a strong hand. The words, meant to dismiss her, to paint her as a fragile, foolish girl, struck Ilara with the force of a physical blow. Frail. The word was an insult to her spirit, to the quiet strength that had allowed her to endure the last 2 years of their petty tyranny. Something inside her, long dormant, finally snapped. She did not raise her voice. She did not weep. She simply lifted her chin, her grey eyes, usually so placid, now holding the cool, dangerous glint of winter ice. She looked directly at her cousin, ignoring the portly squire and the sneering Beatrice completely. A strong hand is not always a wise one, cousin. It was a simple sentence, delivered with a regal composure that was utterly at odds with her station. It was an act of rebellion, so quiet, so profound, that it seemed to hang in the air, shimmering with defiance. The squire blinked, momentarily confused. Beatrice's smile faltered. Finch's face purpled with rage. And from the shadows at the edge of the paddock, a man who had been observing the entire exchange felt a flicker of something he had not felt in a decade. Interest. Duke Alistair Vance stood half concealed by the ancient oak that marked the boundary of the auction ring. Dressed in severe, unrelieved black, he was a figure of stark authority. A man who did not blend into a crowd, but rather made the crowd bend around him. He had come to the fair out of a sense of duty to procure a new stallion for his stables, but the entire affair had been a tedious exercise in provincial sycophancy. Until now, he had watched the Viscount's crass performance and the young woman's silent suffering with a kind of detached contempt. He had heard Finch's dismissive, cruel remark, "Too frail." The words had struck a discordant note within him. He knew frailty. He had seen true frailty, the kind that breaks under the weight of grief, and this young woman did not possess it. What she possessed was a spine of tempered steel, and he had just seen the glint of it. As if summoned by the sudden shift in tension, chaos erupted. A sharp crack, like a pistol shot, echoed from the far side of the fairgrounds, a backfiring motor car. It was the spark that lit the powder keg. Horses reared, grooms shouted, and the crowd surged back in a wave of panic. From the Duke's own retinue, a beast of nightmare broke free. It was Corvus, his personal mount, a war horse of immense size and untamable spirit, black as a starless night. 2 of his most experienced grooms were thrown aside like dolls as the stallion, eyes rolling in terror, bolted directly toward the auction ring. People screamed and scattered, a frantic tide of silks and velvets. Finch grabbed Beatrice's arm and scrambled for cover behind a water trough, his face a mask of pasty fear. The portly squire stumbled and fell in his haste to escape, but Ilara did not move. She stood her ground, a small, still point in the swirling chaos. She saw not a monster, but a terrified animal. The training of her father, the instincts honed over years of quiet communion, took over. As the great horse thundered towards her, she did not cower. She held out a hand, palm open, and spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was low and resonant, a calming hum that cut through the noise. Easy now, handsome one. Easy. You are safe. She did not look into his wild eyes, a gesture of challenge, but at the powerful muscles of his shoulder. She spoke to him of quiet streams and green pastures, nonsense words woven into a melody of pure reassurance. The effect was astonishing. Corvus, who had thrown the most hardened riders and scattered entire hunting parties, faltered. He slowed from a gallop to a canter, then to a jarring trot. He tossed his magnificent head, foam flying from his lips, but his forward momentum ceased. He stood before her, sides heaving, legs trembling, his great dark eyes fixed on the small unthreatening figure who spoke his language. The silence that fell over the fair ground was absolute, a collective held breath of disbelief. Into that silence the Duke stepped forward, his expression unreadable, a mask of cold granite. He moved with an unnerving calm, his gaze shifting from the now quiet beast to the young woman who had tamed it. His grooms hurried forward, but he waved them back with a curt gesture. He stopped a few feet from Ilara, the sheer force of his presence a palpable thing. He looked her up and down, taking in the mended seams of her dress, the resolute set of her jaw, and the complete absence of fear in her eyes. A muscle feathered in his cheek. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low rumble, laced with a harsh grating sound that might have been sarcasm or something else entirely. "She's too frail to ride," he sneered the words, a deliberate, cutting echo of the Viscount's. It was not a question, but a pronouncement, a test thrown down like a gauntlet. The sneer, however, did not quite reach his eyes. In their dark depths there was a flicker of something akin to shock, and perhaps a grudging respect. For the second time that day, Ilara felt a surge of defiance. She was no longer the timid ward of Oakhaven. She was her father's daughter. She met the Duke's glacial stare without flinching, her own gaze clear and direct. A faint, ironic smile touched her lips. "Perhaps he does not need a hand, Your Grace. Perhaps he needs a heart." The Duke's impassive mask finally cracked for a heartbeat. His eyes widened, revealing a raw astonishment. No one spoke to him with such candour. No one dared. He saw then that her strength was not just in her quiet endurance, but in her profound understanding. She saw the soul of the horse, not just its power. In that moment he made a decision that was as swift and absolute as all his others. It was impulsive, illogical, and utterly necessary. He turned his gaze toward the Viscount, who was now cautiously emerging from behind the trough. The Duke's voice dropped, losing all trace of its earlier mockery, becoming the clipped, authoritative tone of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. "Viscount, I am purchasing a number of horses today. I require an assistant with a knowledgeable eye to oversee their transport and settling in at Blackwood. Your cousin has demonstrated a unique aptitude. I will offer her a position. She will be compensated fairly." It was not an offer. It was a command. Finch gaped, his mind struggling to process the turn of events. Beatrice looked as if she had swallowed a wasp. The idea of Ilara, their drab little mouse, being singled out by the formidable Duke Vance was an absurdity, an offence to the natural order of things. But no one, not even a Viscount with an inflated sense of self-importance, refused the Iron Duke. Your Grace, it is an honour, but she is my ward. Her reputation." Finch stammered. "Her reputation will be under my protection." "That should be sufficient," the Duke stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned back to Ilara. A carriage will be sent for you and your belongings this evening. Be ready." Without another word, he took Corvus by the bridle. The great horse, now docile as a lamb, followed him without protest. The Duke walked away, leaving a tableau of stunned silence and impotent fury in his wake. Alara stood alone in the centre of the ring, the quiet victor, her heart hammering against her ribs with a terrifying, exhilarating rhythm. She was free. The carriage that arrived was not a simple transport, it was a statement. Lacquered in glossy black, with the Vance crest emblazoned on the door in silver, it was drawn by 4 perfectly matched greys. It was the chariot of a king, sent to collect a scullery maid. Beatrice watched its arrival from an upstairs window, her face a thunderous mask of jealousy. Finch, having been publicly overruled, could do nothing but bluster, warning Alara not to get ideas above her station. Alara packed her few belongings, a handful of books, her mother's locket, and 2 worn dresses into a small valise as she left Oakhaven. She did not look back. She was not leaving a home, but an imprisonment. Blackwood Manor was not a house. It was a fortress carved from the moorland itself. It rose from the landscape, a formidable edifice of dark grey stone, its mullioned windows like watchful eyes. It was a place that seemed to have been built to keep the world out. As Alara was escorted inside, she was met not by the Duke, but by his housekeeper, Mistress Thorne, a woman as stern and unyielding as the manor itself. Her welcome was clipped and professional, her gaze assessing. Alara was shown to a modest but comfortable room in a wing of the house far from the master's chambers. It was clear her position was that of an employee, a fact that grounded her and eased a small part of her anxiety. Her work began the next morning. The Blackwood stables were a world away from the crumbling stalls at Oakhaven. They were immaculate, orderly, and run with military precision by a head groom named Master Croft, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with a sceptical frown. He made his disapproval of a woman in his domain clear from the outset. But Alara did not try to command. She observed. She worked. She mucked out stalls, prepared feeds, and spent hours simply sitting with the new, nervous horses the Duke had purchased, letting them grow accustomed to her scent and her calm presence. She saw the Duke only from a distance. A glimpse of his tall figure walking the battlements in the twilight, a silhouette in the window of the Grand Library late at night. He never approached her, never spoke a word. She began to wonder if he regretted his impulsive decision. Yet she felt his presence everywhere. A rare, illustrated book on Arabian horse breeds appeared on the small table in her room. A thick, warm cloak was left for her in the stables when the autumn air grew sharp. A pot of her favourite herbal tea, which she had once mentioned idly to a kitchen maid, began appearing with her breakfast tray. They were small, anonymous acts of quiet care, gestures so subtle she might have imagined them, yet they spoke of an unnerving attentiveness. He was watching. Her breakthrough with Master Croft came with Corvus. The great stallion remained volatile, tolerating only the Duke, and enduring the grooms with a simmering resentment. One afternoon he lashed out, kicking a stable boy and sending the others scrambling. Croft was about to resort to a twitch, a brutish tool of control. Alara stepped in, her voice firm. "Please, do not let me try." Desperate, Croft agreed. Alara entered the stall alone, armed only with a soft brush and a pocketful of chopped apples. She did not try to restrain him. She simply began to speak, that same low, crooning murmur she had used at the fair. She groomed him, her strokes long and steady, her presence a balm on his agitated spirit. Within half an hour, the magnificent horse had his head lowered, nuzzling her shoulder like a foal. From that day on, Master Croft treated her with a grudging but profound respect. One evening, seeking refuge from the growing chill, Alara found her way into the manor's library. It was a cavernous room, smelling of old paper, lemon oil, and cold ashes. A fire had been lit in the massive hearth. casting flickering shadows over thousands of leather-bound volumes. She thought the room was empty until a voice emerged from the deep shadows of a wing-back chair. "You find the collection to your liking, Miss Pembroke, the Duke?" She started, clutching the book on equine husbandry she had pulled from a shelf. "Your Grace, I apologize. I did not mean to intrude. You are not intruding," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He rose and moved into the firelight. The harsh lines of his face were softened, his eyes holding a deep, weary sadness. He gestured to the book in her hands. "My late wife, Eleanor, was fond of that one. She believed, as you do, that understanding is a more powerful tool than force." It was the first time he had ever mentioned his wife. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken grief. Eleanor, feeling an empathy that overrode her awe of him, found her voice. "She must have been a remarkable woman, Your Grace." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting, painful expression. "She was. And our daughter Lily, she had her mother's way with animals." He paused, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "They died not far from here, a carriage accident. The horses were new, a matched pair I had bought for her." The groom used a heavy hand to show them who was master. They bolted at the sound of a falling branch. The carriage overturned. The confession fell into the silent room, stark and terrible. Suddenly, his coldness, his reclusiveness, his sneer at the fair, it all coalesced into a single, heartbreaking image. It was not cruelty that drove him, but a profound 10-year-old wound that had never healed. His self-imposed winter was a penance. He saw in the brute force of the world the thing that had stolen everything from him. And at the fair he had seen Alara, the antithesis of that force. He had seen a quiet strength, a gentle wisdom that he thought had vanished from the world with his wife. "I saw you at the fair," he said, his voice now a low whisper, "standing your ground against that oaf and his sister. And then against Corvus. You have a strength they cannot comprehend, the kind of strength I had forgotten existed." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and for the first time, Alara did not see the Iron Duke. She saw a man named Alistair drowning in a sea of memory, and she, for some inexplicable reason, was the shore. The fragile peace of their shared confidence was shattered 2 days later by the arrival of a mud-splattered carriage. Viscount Finch stormed into the great hall of Blackwood Manor, his face mottled with fury and cheap brandy. He had come to reclaim his property. "I am her legal guardian," he bellowed at a stoic Mistress Thorne. "This is an outrage. I demand her immediate return. Her reputation is in tatters, sequestered here with this recluse." The Duke appeared at the top of the grand staircase, his presence instantly silencing Finch's tirade. He descended the stairs, slowly, deliberately, each step a silent drumbeat of menace. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The cold fury radiating from him was more terrifying than any shout. "Your concern for Miss Pembroke's reputation is touching, Finch," Alistair said, his voice dangerously soft. "Especially given your plans to sell her to the highest bidder." Finch blanched. "That is a slanderous lie, is it?" The Duke reached the bottom of the stairs and handed a sheaf of papers to his butler. "I have spent the last several weeks taking an interest in your financial affairs. It seems you have a rather unfortunate fondness for the gaming tables at White's. Your debts are considerable." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Or rather, they were. I purchased them all yesterday morning." Along with the mortgage on Oakhaven Manor, the colour drained completely from Finch's face. He looked as if he had been turned to stone. He was ruined. Utterly and completely. "You will leave my lands, Viscount," the Duke continued, his voice like the chipping of ice. "And you will never speak Miss Alara's name again. If I hear even a whisper that you have, I will not simply ruin you. I will erase you. Do you understand?" Finch, trembling and broken, could only nod mutely. He was escorted from the hall, a pathetic, deflated man, his blustering rage extinguished. Elora, who had witnessed the entire exchange from the shadows of a corridor, was stunned into silence. She had never witnessed such a ruthless, systematic dismantling of another human being. It was terrifying, and yet it had all been for her. Alistair turned and saw her standing there, her eyes wide. The cold mask of the Iron Duke fell away, replaced by an expression of raw vulnerability. He crossed the hall to her in 3 long strides. "Alara," he began, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. "I know that was brutal, but men like him only understand brutality." He took her hands in his grip surprisingly gentle. "From the moment I saw you stand up to him, so brave and so dignified, I felt the ice that has encased my heart for 10 years begin to crack. You have brought light back into this house. You have brought life back into me." He looked down at their joined hands, then met her gaze, his own dark eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath. "I have lived in winter for a decade, Ilara. You are the first sign of spring. This is not about protection, not anymore. It is about partnership, about everything." He took a deep breath, the confession tearing from him as if it were a physical part of his soul. "Marry me, Alara. Be my duchess, be my equal, be my wife." The proposal hung in the air between them, more shocking than Finch's ruin, more powerful than the taming of Corvus. It was not an offer of sanctuary, but a plea for salvation his own. And looking into the eyes of this broken, powerful man, Ilara knew, with a certainty that was as calm and deep as her connection to the horses she so loved, that her answer was yes. To announce their engagement, Alistair decided to resurrect a tradition that had died with his first wife, the annual ducal hunt ball. It was a strategic move, a public declaration designed to cement Ilara's new status and silence any lingering gossip. For weeks, Blackwood Manor, so long silent and sombre, was a hive of activity. Dust cloths were whisked away, chandeliers were polished until they glittered like constellations, and invitations were sent out on thick, creamy cardstock that caused a sensation throughout the county. Ilara, at first overwhelmed, found her footing with the Duke's quiet encouragement. She worked with Mistress Thorne on menus and with the gardeners on floral arrangements, her innate intelligence and grace winning over the staff who had once viewed her with suspicion. On the night of the ball, she stood before the mirror in her chambers, a stranger to herself. The Duke had commissioned a gown for her from London, a creation of deep sapphire silk that shimmered like a twilight sky. It was elegant and understated, yet it transformed her. Her hair, usually in a simple braid, was swept up, revealing the graceful line of her neck, adorned only with her mother's simple locket. When Alistair came to escort her, he stopped dead in the doorway, his breath catching in his throat. He said nothing, but the look in his eyes, a mixture of awe, adoration, and fierce possession, was more eloquent than any poem. They descended the grand staircase together, a united front. Their entrance into the glittering ballroom caused an immediate hush. Ilara Pembroke, the poor relation, the drab little mouse from Oakhaven, was on the arm of the Iron Duke, looking not like a rescued waif, but like a queen. As they began the first waltz, Ilara felt as if she were floating. Alistair held her securely, his hand warm at her waist, his eyes never leaving hers. The world of whispers and judging glances faded away, leaving only the two of them. A silent island in a sea of swirling silk and candlelight. As predicted, Viscount Finch and his sister Beatrice made an appearance. They were a pathetic sight. Finch looked haggard and desperate, while Beatrice's face was pinched with a venomous envy that soured her beauty. They clearly hoped to leverage social pressure, to appeal to the assembled gentry with a tale of a poor impressionable ward being taken advantage of. They had fatally misjudged their opponent. After the waltz, Alistair tapped a glass for silence. He stood with his arm securely around Alara's waist, a gesture of unwavering public support. "My dear friends and neighbours," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. "Thank you for joining me tonight to celebrate the return of light and life to Blackwood. I have a further joy to announce." He smiled down at Alara, a genuine, breathtaking smile that stunned the onlookers. "I have asked Miss Alara Pembroke to be my wife and my Duchess. She has done me the great honour of accepting." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. Before anyone could formulate a response, Alistair continued, his tone becoming casually conversational. "To that end, as my fiancé has such a passion for fine horses, I have recently acquired the neighbouring Oakhaven estate. I intend to convert the land to expand my breeding programme." He delivered the line with the cool precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was a public execution. He had not only announced their engagement, but had also revealed his complete ownership of Finch's ancestral home, framing it as a mere gift for his future wife. Finch's last vestige of social standing evaporated in that moment. He was no longer a viscount who had fallen on hard times. He was a footnote in the Duke's love story. Beatrice, however, was not one to be silenced so easily. Her pride wounded beyond repair, she cornered Alara near the refreshment table later in the evening. Her voice was a low, vicious hiss. "What a remarkable performance! I suppose even a stable girl can land a duke if she plays her cards right. Tell me, did you offer him a private demonstration of your handling skills?" The insult was crude, designed to provoke a tearful, hysterical reaction. The Alara of Oakhaven might have flinched. But this was the future Duchess of Blackwood. She did not raise her voice. She did not flush with anger. She simply turned a small, serene smile playing on her lips and looked Beatrice directly in the eye. "Indeed, it seems some of us know how to handle thoroughbreds, Lady Beatrice, and others are left with donkeys." The verbal blow was so quiet, so perfectly articulated, and so utterly devastating that Beatrice physically recoiled as if struck. A small ripple of appreciative laughter spread from those who had overheard the exchange. Beatrice, her face a mask of pure hatred, turned and fled the ballroom, her social ruin now complete and absolute. Alara watched her go, not with triumph, but with the calm finality of a chapter closed. She had found her voice, and it was sharper than any sword. Later that evening, Alistair led her out onto a stone balcony that overlooked the moon-drenched gardens. The cool night air was a relief after the heat of the ballroom. Below them, the world was silent and silvered. He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with a reverence that made her heart ache. "You were magnificent," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "She deserved far worse. She has it," Alara replied softly. "She has to live with herself." He looked at her, at the quiet wisdom in her eyes, and knew he was the luckiest man alive. The 10 years of frozen grief, of self-imposed exile, had been a long dark night, but the dawn had finally come, and it was more brilliant than he could have ever imagined. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of certainty of homecoming. It was a sealing of their bond, a passionate promise of a shared future, of a new beginning forged in the ashes of their separate, lonely pasts. They were married a week later, not in a grand cathedral, but in the small, ancient chapel on the Blackwood grounds, with only Mistress Thorne and Master Croft as witnesses. It was a ceremony of quiet sincerity, a private vow that needed no audience. Afterward, they did not embark on a grand tour of the continent. They simply retreated into the sanctuary of Blackwood, their world shrinking to the boundaries of the estate, a universe unto themselves. The following year passed in a blur of contented seasons. Elora, now the Duchess of Blackwood, blossomed. She took over the management of the Duke's stables, her intuitive and gentle methods revolutionizing their breeding program. The Blackwood horses, already famous for their strength, became renowned for their temperament and intelligence. She restored the abandoned gardens his first wife had loved, not erasing the memory of her predecessor, but honouring it, coaxing life and colour back into the dormant earth. She filled the silent halls of the manor with warmth and quiet laughter. Alistair, in turn, was a changed man. The moniker of Iron Duke became a relic of a forgotten time, a name used only by those who did not know him. To his wife, he was simply Alistair. The harsh lines on his face softened, replaced by a ready smile. He was no longer a phantom in his own home, but an active participant in its life. He consulted Elara on every aspect of the estate's management, valuing her sharp intellect as much as her gentle heart. They were a true partnership, their strengths and vulnerabilities perfectly balanced. They were often seen riding out across the moors. Together Elara mounted on the magnificent Corvus, who now behaved like a devoted poppy in her presence, and Alistair on a proud grey stallion, his eyes always on his wife, a look of profound, enduring love on his face. One crisp autumn afternoon, as they sat before the fire in the library, a letter arrived with their post. Alistair read it and passed it to Elara with a wry expression. It was from a London solicitor, detailing the final disposition of the Finch estate. The Viscount, utterly destitute, had been seen working as a common clerk, his title a source of mockery among his colleagues. Beatrice had, in a final act of desperation, married a gout-ridden elderly baron with a foul temper and a crumbling castle in the north. Their winter had come, bleak and unforgiving. Elara set the letter aside, feeling not a shred of satisfaction, only a distant pity. Their world was so small, so consumed by spite and status. Hers, in contrast, had become boundless. She looked at her husband, at the love that shone in his eyes, and felt a wave of gratitude so immense it was a physical presence in the room. He had not rescued her, they had rescued each other. He had given her a home, and she had given him a reason to live in it. The winter of their own making was over, and together in the heart of Blackwood they had cultivated an endless spring.